Hello and welcome to Once Upon a Classic. Today we invite you to immerse yourself in an illustrated, abridged audiobook presentation of the Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. As the story unfolds, hand-picked artwork will appear on screen, bringing every decadent scene and haunting revelation to life. If you enjoy this experience, please like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Tell us in the comments which abridged classic you would like to hear next. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. The studio overflowed with the thick scents of summer, the heavy sweetness of roses, lilac, and blossoming thorns drifting in through an open door. Lord Henry Wotton lounged lazily on a Persian divan, idly watching sunlight dance on silk curtains and gold-tipped plants, while the background hum of London lingered like distant music. Centered in the room was a large, arresting portrait. A young man, impossibly beautiful, immortalized on canvas by Basil Hallward, the artist now quietly basking in the work's aura, and its almost dangerous intimacy. Lord Henry, a worldly, sharp-tongued dandy, broke the silence. "It's your best, Basil. You must show it. The art world will swoon." Basil shook his head, his Oxford old mannerisms returning. "No, I can't. I've put too much of myself into it." Henry pressed, incredulous, teasing Basil for being vain. "You're nothing like him, with your strong face and intellectual eyes. He's a living Narcissus." Basil replied, "You don't understand. The gifted suffer. My mind, your wealth, Dorian's beauty. We'll pay for what the gods gave us." At last, Basil revealed the muse's name, Dorian Gray. Henry, slyly curious, asked, "Why keep him so secret?" Basil explained he protected Dorian's identity to preserve a sense of mystery. Henry found it amusing, contrasting it with his own marriage, which he joked was more deception than romance. The pair moved into the garden, all light and flowers, their conversation turning serious. Henry doggedly tried to uncover the real reason Basil wouldn't display the portrait. Basil confessed, "Every true portrait is of the artist, not the sitter. I've revealed the secret of my own soul." Henry laughed. "And what's your secret?" Basil recounted first meeting Dorian at a society party. Dorian's mere presence overwhelmed him with a mix of dread and awe. Basil realized this was a turning point in his life. He tried to escape, but was ensnared by Lady Brandon, an overbearing socialite who introduced them with comic cluelessness. "We would have spoken without her. We were meant to meet," said Basil. Their friendship grew, with Dorian's beauty and essence inspiring Basil's best work. "He's more than a model. He's changed the way I see the world. His presence has shaped my art, sparked something new in me." Henry, never missing a chance for irony, observed, "Basil, this is a romance. The worst part is such things always make us unromantic in the end." Henry insisted on meeting Dorian, but Basil hesitated. "He's my dearest friend. His nature is simple and beautiful. Don't try to influence him. Your influence would be bad." Henry shrugged off the warning with a smile, joking as the butler, Parker, announced Dorian's arrival. Basil reluctantly led Henry inside to meet the muse who had changed his soul, bracing himself for whatever might follow. Dorian Gray sat at the piano, lost in Schumann's music, his golden hair catching the light. He seemed almost boyishly petulant when Basil Hallward prompted him to sit for the portrait. But everything changed when Dorian met Lord Henry Wotton, a sharp, magnetic figure, old Oxford friend to Basil, known for his dangerous wit and subtle influence. After a few pleasantries about Lady Agatha and missed charitable promises, Dorian couldn't help but be drawn to Lord Henry's charm and provocative ideas. Basil, with his steady focus on art, grew tense as Lord Henry soothed and teased Dorian while he posed, their easy banter floating across the room. "Am I to go, Mr. Gray?" Lord Henry asked, smiling. "Please don't," replied Dorian, ignoring Basil's scowl. "I can't imagine having to sit in silence." As Basil surrendered to the inevitable, Lord Henry turned his rolling insights onto Dorian. "There is no such thing as a good influence," he said, lounging on the divan. "All influence is immoral. The aim of life is self-development, to realize one's nature perfectly. That's what each of us is here for." His words struck Dorian like a physical force. He stood transfixed as Lord Henry painted wild, enticing pictures of living for pleasure, of yielding to temptation, and the fleeting nature of youth. Basil, noticing a new look in Dorian's eyes, quietly asked him to slightly adjust his pose. Soon after, Dorian retreated to the garden, overwhelmed and longing for air. Lord Henry followed, whispering wisdom almost conspiratorially as Dorian inhaled the scent of lilacs. "Nothing can cure the soul but the senses, just as nothing can cure the senses but the soul," he murmured. Dorian gazed at him, fascinated but wary. Lord Henry pressed on, "You have the most marvelous youth, and youth is the one thing worth having. The world belongs to you for a season. Live the wonderful life that is in you." The world outside seemed to shimmer as Dorian absorbed Henry's message. They were called back to the studio, where Basil finished the portrait. When Dorian looked at his painted face, an ache of longing and pain swept over him. For the first time he saw the full radiance of his beauty and the cruel truth that it would not last. How sad it is. I shall grow old and dreadful, but this picture will always be young," Dorian cried. "If it were only the other way, I would give my soul for that." Basil was shocked by his despair. Dorian lashed out, jealous. "I am less to you than your ivory Hermes. When I lose my looks, I lose everything. Your picture has taught me that." Basil, anguished, almost destroyed the canvas. Dorian wrenched the knife away, sobbing, "Don't, Basil. It would be murder." Tension faded into weary laughter as tea arrived, and plans for the theater surfaced. Lord Henry lured Dorian out for the evening, leaving Basil behind, saddened and alone with the portrait. As Dorian left, uncertain about his thrilling new friendship, Basil's heart ached at the change in his muse and friend. Around midday, Lord Henry made his way to see his uncle, Lord Fermor, a cantankerous old bachelor who was a blend of crusty tradition and sly generosity. Society found Lord Fermor selfish unless he was entertained, but in elite circles his hospitality was well known. Now, in old age, he'd appointed himself an expert in doing nothing and grumbled equally about politics and his many irrelevant relatives. Lord Henry greeted him comfortably, fending off quips about his late-morning habits. "I want information, not money, Uncle George." "Useless information, mind you," Henry said, brushing off his uncle's assumption that he had come, like all youths, in search of funds. "Who is this Dorian Gray you keep mentioning?" Lord Fermor eyed him suspiciously. Henry pressed for details about Dorian's mother, Margaret Devereux, a beauty who'd ignited scandal by marrying an obscure soldier and suffered tragedy after her husband's death in a duel. "Yes, I remember. Kelso's daughter," Lord Fermor recounted with relish. "She died young, a romantic, leaving behind only her infant son, Dorian. If he's anything like his mother, he's a fine-looking boy." Henry nodded thoughtfully, drawing out that Dorian must be wealthy, having inherited the Selby estate, and beautiful, just as described. Lord Fermor mused, "Those Devereux women were always madly romantic. The men weren't much, but the women, spectacular." Their conversation veered to the latest society gossip. Henry joked about Anglo-American marriages, his uncle grumbling about the fashion for marrying U.S. heiresses. Lord Henry quipped, "American girls conceal their parents as well as English girls conceal their past." Closing the visit, Henry teased about Aunt Agatha's relentless charity campaigns and strolled away, his mind alive with the tragic, romantic aura now surrounding Dorian. The story of Dorian's parentage fascinated Henry. He saw in Dorian the possibility for artistry and influence, his own ideas reflected and amplified by the young man's innocence and beauty. To project one's soul into a gracious form, what more marvelous joy can there be? Henry, absently lost in thought, nearly missed his lunch at Aunt Agatha's. The dining room was full of notable characters: the ever-pleasant Duchess of Harley, the earnest Sir Thomas Burden, the silent and cultured Mr. Erskine, and the saintly but dowdy Mrs. Vandeleur. Dorian, sitting quietly, gave Henry a shy nod, obviously drawn to him. The conversation among the guests bounced from London gossip to America's invasion of their marriage market. "Did you hear Dartmoor's fiancé is American?" the Duchess asked. "I believe she plans to propose to him herself," Henry replied, stirring laughter. Henry's wit didn't spare America itself. When good Americans die, they go to Paris. The bad ones go to America. Laughter circled the table, while Sir Thomas, a rationalist, tried to defend U.S. reasonableness, to which Henry retorted, "Brute reason is quite unbearable. It's hitting below the intellect." Lady Agatha tried to recruit Dorian for her charitable work. Henry, deflecting, mused, "I can sympathize with everything except suffering. One should sympathize with the beauty and joy of life." The discussion swayed to the value of folly. "If you want your youth back, Duchess, repeat your follies," Henry advised. "Most people die of creeping common sense." Throughout, Dorian's eyes rarely left Henry. Henry's improvisations poured over the table, dazzling the listeners. Dorian was enthralled. Henry could feel the young man's openness to his influence taking root. Eventually, polite reality intruded. The ladies departed. Mr. Erskine, impressed, pleaded, "You talk books away. Why not write one?" Henry responded lightly, but the invitation to Treadley was sincere. On his way out, Dorian hesitantly approached. "Let me come with you," he asked softly. "No one talks so wonderfully as you do." Henry smiled. "I've talked enough for today. All I want now is to look at life. You may come if you care to." A month after their first meeting, Dorian lounged in Lord Henry's elegant Mayfair library, restlessly skimming a picture book, waiting for his friend. The hush of the room and the relentless ticking of the clock grated on him. Lord Henry was predictably late, as always, for he considered punctuality tedious. When Dorian heard footsteps, he expected Henry, but it was Lady Victoria Wotton instead. Victoria was a fluttering, dishevelled woman, her vivid dresses always slightly awry, and her mind ever set on romantic entanglements that went unreturned. Lord Henry's wife, Victoria, chatted in her quirky, nervous way about music and foreigners, all while trying to win Dorian's interest. Victoria laughed, tossing about, "I can't afford orchids, Mr. Gray, but I spare no expense with foreigners. You simply must come to my parties." Before Dorian could reply, Lord Henry finally breezed in, eyebrows raised. "So sorry to be late. I had to haggle over brocade, and in our world, everyone knows the price of everything and the value of nothing." Lady Henry soon excused herself, and Henry, with a sly smile, urged Dorian never to marry a sentimental woman. Dorian insisted it was not on his mind. He was already in love, passionately for the first time, with an actress named Sybil Vane. Henry, always the skeptic on love and women's genius, poked fun at Dorian's infatuation. But Dorian, flushed and animated, described how, inspired by Henry's world view, he'd gone out seeking adventure and stumbled across a shabby little theatre in the East End. There he'd been dazzled by Sybil's beauty and acting, watching her play heroines like Juliet and Rosalind night after night. "She is the loveliest thing I've ever seen," Dorian said, glowing, "and her voice, it haunts me. She is everything." Lord Henry laughed gently. "You will always be in love with love, but this is only your first romance, not your last." Irritated, Dorian insisted his feelings ran deep. He told how, after several visits, he was finally introduced to Sybil, thanks to the theatre's pushy owner, Mr. Isaacs, a garish man obsessed with Shakespeare and desperate for wealthy patrons. When they met, Sybil saw Dorian as a prince from a dream and nicknamed him Prince Charming. She seemed young, innocent, and otherworldly, a stark contrast to her faded mother, who also acted but was worn down by life. Henry probed about Sybil. "What is she to you? Just a fantasy?" Dorian shook his head. "She's sacred." He explained he knew nothing of her personal past and didn't care. Every night, the only thing he cared about was her transformation on stage. "She is all the great heroines of the world in one," he insisted, pacing the room, intensity in his voice. "How do I make her love me, Harry? I want our passion to waken the dead lovers of the world. How I worship her." Henry watched Dorian with fascination, a flower opening towards sunlight. Dorian invited Henry and Basil to see Sybil perform. He was determined to rescue her from her contract with Isaacs and bring her to a grander stage. As Dorian left for the theatre, Henry reflected, amused and proud. He recognized his influence had shaped Dorian's desires. To Henry, people were mysteries worthy of study, and Dorian, with his beauty and tempestuous heart, was a living work of art. It didn't matter how it all ended. Dorian's emotional blossoming delighted him. That night, after dinner, Lord Henry received a telegram. Dorian was now engaged to Sybil Vane. Sybil Vane couldn't contain her joy, sharing it with her weary mother in their drab sitting room. She spoke of happiness, insisting it was nothing to do with their constant worries about money or their reliance on Mr. Isaacs, the theatre manager who had advanced them £50. Mrs. Vane, cautious and careworn, reminded Sybil that gratitude and prudence should guide her thoughts, but Sybil dismissed money as unimportant. What truly mattered was her love for the mysterious young man she called Prince Charming. Mrs. Vane tried feebly to warn her daughter against dreaming, but Sybil was alight with hope, her heart ablaze. "I love him," she said simply, imagining every tender moment with Dorian. When her mother shifted to talking of practical matters, debts, marriage prospects, whether the young man was rich, Sybil smiled, lost in her daydream. Desperate for reassurance, Sybil asked, "Mother, did you love my father as I love Prince Charming?" The question brought a shadow of pain to her mother's face, and Sybil embraced her, apologizing, too happy in the moment to stop herself from reaching for the past. Their conversation was interrupted when Jim Vane, Sybil's older brother, entered. Broad-shouldered and awkward, his love for Sybil showed in his gruff manner. He'd soon be leaving for Australia to seek fortune at sea, a fact that overshadowed his every word. "Let's take a walk, Sybil," he said, determined to spend his last day with her as their mother fussed about his future. Sybil delighted in the time with Jim, teasing him as they walked the busy London streets. She joked about his future adventures, treasure in Australia, brushes with danger, and a life filled with good fortune, while he listened quietly, weighed down by concern. Jim's worry focused on his sister's infatuation. "You have a new friend, I hear. Who is he? He means you no good." Sybil, flushed with love, answered, "He's called Prince Charming. If you only saw him." She was breathless, thinking of Dorian, convinced he was not just a gentleman, but a prince, a personification of her every romantic dream. Jim was unconvinced. "You don't even know his name." But Sybil only laughed, describing the delight that love and acting brought her, how every performance was now for her, beloved. As they sat together in the park, Sybil caught sight of Dorian Gray passing by in a carriage, his golden hair shining, and pointed him out to Jim. But the carriage vanished before Jim could see. "If he ever does you any wrong, I shall kill him," Jim swore, his protective anger surging. Sybil scolded him, declaring, "You are foolish, Jim, utterly foolish. Love makes people good." Jim insisted, "I know what I'm about. Mother can't watch over you. Promise you'll be careful." Sybil only smiled sadly, sure that her love was invincible. Back home, Sybil prepared for her evening show, the promise of Dorian's presence a magic in her veins. Jim, meanwhile, struggled with a long-held suspicion about his family. He finally asked his mother a question that had haunted him. "Were you married to my father?" Mrs. Vane admitted she was not, explaining that the man she'd loved had never been free but had truly cared for them. Jim, angered and humiliated, pressed again about Sybil's mysterious suitor. "It is a gentleman, isn't it? Highly connected too, I suppose." As Jim left for Australia, real affection passed between him and his mother, their dramatic quarrel adding color to her otherwise faded life. Jim's promise echoed with ferocity. If Sybil was ever wronged, he would find the man and exact revenge. But as the drama of departure faded into routine, the packing, the farewells, the waving handkerchief, Mrs. Vane was left feeling somehow let down by reality, consoled only by her favorite words about having one child left to care for. Sybil, true to her name, dreamed on, her brother gone, her heart still with Prince Charming. Lord Henry met Basil Hallward in an intimate dining room where anticipation hung in the air. As they settled in, Lord Henry leaned in, eyes twinkling with mischief. "Dorian Gray is engaged," he announced, relishing Basil's shocked expression. Basil, the devoted artist and Dorian's friend, protested, "Impossible, Dorian is far too sensible." Henry, unfazed, replied, "He's too wise not to sometimes be foolish. He's engaged to some young actress, and we're meeting her tonight." Basil fretted about social propriety, Dorian's wealth and reputation, but Henry shrugged these concerns away. To him, Dorian's impulsiveness was all part of the vibrant tapestry of youth. "Whenever a man does a thoroughly stupid thing, it is always from the noblest motives," Henry quipped, sipping his drink. Basil worried aloud. "I hope this girl is good, Harry. I don't want to see Dorian ruined by some wretched creature." But Henry seemed enchanted by the idea, dismissing talk of morality. "Every experience is of value. I hope Dorian marries her and, when he's bored, finds himself fascinated by someone else. He'd make a wonderful study." Their talk was interrupted by Dorian's exuberant arrival. He swept into the room, radiant, confessing, "I have never been so happy." He described the rush of falling in love with Sybil Vane, the actress who had enchanted him the night before as Rosalind. Dorian raved about her beauty and talent, recalling in detail her costume, her grace, and the transformative power of their first kiss backstage. Basil struggled to share Dorian's joy, still anxious about his friend's whirlwind engagement. Lord Henry, ever the provocateur, wondered aloud, "At what point did you mention marriage, Dorian? Did she even say yes?" Dorian, glowing, replied, "I told her I loved her. She said she wasn't worthy to be my wife." "Not worthy. The whole world means nothing beside her." Henry turned the conversation philosophical, questioning what it meant to be good. "To be good is to be in harmony with oneself," he said. Basil, ever earnest, worried about the price of living selfishly. Remorse, suffering, even degradation. But Henry, always the cynic, dismissed such old-fashioned feelings. No civilized man ever regrets a pleasure. Dorian, eager to defend love, declared, "I know what pleasure is. It's to adore someone." The conversation danced around love and women, with Henry teasing, "Women inspire us to masterpieces and then distract us from creating them." As coffee arrived and coats were donned, Henry promised a new experience. "Yes, Dorian, you will always be fond of me. I represent to you all the sins you've never had the courage to commit." Dorian only laughed, insisting that Sybil would give them a new ideal for life. They departed for the theatre, Dorian and Henry together, with Basil following alone. In the carriage, Basil felt a chill of loss, suspecting that Dorian's affection had shifted forever. As he watched the sparkling lights ahead, he realized his young muse was slipping away, swept up in new passions that left Basil behind. The theater buzzed with excitement that night, a packed house swirling with rough characters and shrill voices. The manager, a pompous man with fat, jeweled hands, fussed over Dorian Gray and his two companions, Basil Hallward, the sensitive painter, and Lord Henry, ever the sardonic observer. Dorian hated the manager, but Lord Henry found the scene delightfully absurd, savoring the spectacle. With impatience, Dorian explained the effect the young actress Sybil Vane had on the crowd. "When Sybil acts, you forget everything. She makes these people into something finer." Basil agreed, saying, "Any girl who can do that is worthy of the world's adoration." Lord Henry, peering through his opera glasses, scoffed at the idea of sharing flesh and blood with the raucous crowd, but Dorian only smiled, his hope pinned on Sybil's talent. Sybil Vane arrived on stage, luminous and shy, a vision even Lord Henry admired. But as soon as she spoke, her lines as Juliet, something felt wrong. Her words, though perfectly spoken, sounded empty, drained of soul. Gone was the passion that had enchanted Dorian nights before. Instead, she seemed distant, performing as though the words were hollow. Dorian's heart tightened with each scene, his friends silent with disappointment. They pinned their last hope on the famous balcony scene. Though Sybil looked angelic, bathed in false moonlight, her acting grew more deliberate, mechanical. Even the unruly audience lost patience, hissing and laughing. After the second act, Lord Henry stood, voice low. "She is quite beautiful, Dorian, but she can't act. Let us go." Dorian, stung, replied bitterly, "I'm going to see the play through." Basil tried to comfort him. Surely she must be ill. But Dorian dismissed the idea. "She's altered completely. Last night she was a great artist. Tonight she is merely ordinary." Lord Henry, ever cool, joked, "What does it matter if your wife plays Juliet like a wooden doll? She's very lovely." Dorian only begged to be left alone, holding back tears. The play limped on to its end, curtain falling to a scattering of jeers. Dorian, desperate for answers, rushed backstage. He found Sybil beaming with a strange, joyous light. "How badly I acted tonight, Dorian," she admitted cheerfully. His voice was harsh. "Horribly. Do you even understand what I suffered?" She tried to explain, love making her radiant. "Before you, acting was my reality, all I knew. But tonight, on stage, I saw it was all fake. You've given me something real. I can't pretend anymore. Please understand. Take me away from here. Love is more than art." But Dorian recoiled, heart chilled by her confession. "You have killed my love. I loved you because you had genius. Without it, you're nothing to me." She knelt, crying out for forgiveness, but he pulled away and, unmoved, left her sobbing on the floor. He wandered the city streets all night, haunted by the sting of regret, the cruelty he'd shown. At dawn, surrounded by Covent Garden's market and cool, fresh flowers, he tried to numb his pain. At last, he returned home, lost in thought, and stumbled upon Basil's portrait, the painting of his blameless youth. Strangely, in the dawn's light, the face in the portrait seemed changed. There was a cruel line at the mouth, a glint of something ugly. He compared it to his reflection, but found no such mark. Had his mad wish, to stay forever young while the picture bore the mark of age and sin, come true? The thought unnerved him. He tried to convince himself it was all in his mind, poisoned by a night of heartache. Yet the portrait watched him silently, accusing. Horrified, Dorian resolved he would not be ruled by Lord Henry and his poisonous ideas. He would return to Sybil, beg forgiveness, and try to love her again. He shut the portrait behind a screen, shuddered at its stare, and escaped into the garden, breathing in the morning air, clinging to the memory of his lost love, and a faint hope for redemption. Dorian woke late in the day, his loyal valet Victor surprised at how deeply the young man slept. Victor brought tea and a stack of letters, dinner invitations, bills for luxury he wasn't brave enough to confess to his guardians, and tempting notes from London moneylenders. Dorian felt numb, drinking tea in a dressing gown of lush cashmere, trying to shake off the haunting sense of a nightmare. Was that cruelty he'd seen in the portrait, or just his imagination? He tried to immerse himself in a lavish breakfast, the fresh scent of roses and warm air gently calming him, but the sight of the ornate screen shielding his portrait pierced his happiness. Anxious, he sent Victor away and locked the doors. He finally confronted the hidden painting. The change was real. Fascinated and horrified, he wondered, could my soul really shape this canvas? Yet with this dread, Dorian understood just how terribly he'd wronged Sybil Vane. He resolved to make things right, clinging to the idea that love could redeem him. He poured his remorse into a desperate letter to Sybil, believing in the strange comfort of confession. A sudden knock. Lord Henry, ever insistent. Dorian let him in, bracing to share his new resolve. Lord Henry greeted him, tone light. "You mustn't brood, Dorian. Did you see Sybil after the play?" "I was brutal, Harry," Dorian admitted. "But it's all right now. I want to be good. I'll marry her." Lord Henry paused, troubled. "Marry her? Didn't you read my letter?" Dorian shook his head. It was then Harry delivered the blow. Sybil Vane was dead, an apparent suicide. Dorian was shattered. "It's not true! Harry, how can you say it?" "It's in all the papers. She drank poison. There will be an inquest. You must keep away. There's no reason to get dragged into scandal." Grief and guilt crashed inside Dorian. He gasped, "I killed her, as surely as if I'd cut her throat. Life just rolls on. How can I keep living as if nothing happened?" "People die for love," Henry mused. "If you'd married her, you'd both be miserable. These passions are brief, Dorian." Dorian paced, white-faced. "I thought doing right would make a difference, but good intentions always come too late, don't they? Good resolutions are simply checks written on a bank with no funds," Harry quipped. Despite his bravado, Dorian couldn't deny it. The tragedy felt distant, more like a powerful scene in a play than a real wound. Harry's words coaxed him toward numb acceptance. Tragedy was only art, after all. Dorian said, "It all feels like a marvelous experience. Is there still more waiting for me in life?" Harry assured him there was, so long as Dorian remained young and beautiful. Only age would force you to work for your victories. After Harry left, Dorian hurried to the portrait, the painting's mouth still twisted in cruelty, mocking him. He realized the portrait would now carry all his sins, while outwardly he remained untouched, forever youthful. The thought was both a thrill and a sorrow. He toyed with prayer, then dismissed it. Why give up this strange bargain? Instead, he would watch the portrait for signs of his soul's inner life, letting it change for him while he savored his own beauty and pleasure. With the screen back in place, Dorian composed himself, rejoined society, and an hour later sat at the opera, Lord Henry by his side. The tragedy of Sybil Vane faded into myth, a sad and beautiful warning, but no longer a burden Dorian would bear alone. As Dorian Gray finished his breakfast, his friend Basil Hallward entered, grave and worried. Basil, a gentle, sincere painter whose talent blossomed through his deep affection for Dorian, had tracked Dorian down after reading in the papers about Sybil Vane's tragic death. Basil confessed he'd anxiously searched for Dorian the night before and was heartbroken about Sybil. But Dorian, appearing bored and sipping wine, brushed aside Basil's concern and revealed he'd been at the opera instead. "If one doesn't talk about a thing, it has never happened," he said, echoing Lord Henry's philosophy. Dorian spoke lightly, mentioning that Sybil wasn't her mother's only child, and swiftly changed the subject. Basil was shocked at Dorian's coldness. "You went to the opera while she was lying dead?" he asked, his voice tight with pain. Dorian defended himself. "What is past is past. I don't want to be at the mercy of my emotions. I want to use them, enjoy them, dominate them." Basil stared at him, heartbroken by how much Dorian had changed. "You were the most unspoiled creature in the world," Basil lamented. Dorian, feeling attacked, credited Harry for his development and accused Basil of only making him vain. The closeness of their friendship was shaken. When Basil expressed his longing for the Dorian he'd once painted, Dorian responded bitterly, "You have come too late. Yesterday, I suffered immensely. But it passed away. I cannot repeat an emotion. You are awfully unjust, Basil." Dorian asked Basil not to pity him or try to console him according to the old ways. To become the spectator of one's own life is to escape the suffering of life. He pleaded, "Don't leave me, Basil, and don't quarrel with me. I am what I am." Moved by Dorian's vulnerability, but still troubled, Basil said he hoped Dorian's name wouldn't be mentioned at the inquest. Dorian assured him, "They don't know my name. She only called me Prince Charming." Dorian requested Basil draw Sybil for him, wishing for more than just memories. Basil agreed, but asked Dorian to sit for him again, which Dorian abruptly refused. This strange refusal led Basil to question why the screen hid the portrait. When he tried to look, Dorian panicked, blocking him. "If you touch this screen, everything is over between us." Basil, baffled, agreed not to look, but mentioned intending to include the portrait in an upcoming Paris exhibition. At this, Dorian became terrified. He reminded Basil, "You told me a month ago you would never exhibit it. Why have you changed your mind?" Dorian realized everyone has secrets, even Basil. He pressed the painter. "We have each of us a secret. What was your reason for refusing to exhibit my picture?" Basil, troubled, finally confessed. Dorian's presence deeply affected him and had inspired and tormented his work. "You became to me the visible incarnation of that unseen ideal." "I worshipped you," Basil admitted, blushing with vulnerability. All the admiration, the jealousy, and intensity, he poured it into Dorian's portrait, fearing it exposed too much of his soul. That was why he could never let it be shown. Dorian felt both relief that his own secret remained safe and compassion for Basil, recognizing the tragic nature of such romantic friendship. They sat in uneasy understanding. Basil wondered if he might now be permitted to see the portrait, but Dorian refused. "Impossible," Dorian reiterated, sensing how dangerous the portrait's secret had become. Basil mourned the loss. Few come across one ideal thing. Dorian lightened the moment, promising to visit, but not to sit again. As Basil left, Dorian reflected on the confession, which explained so much about his friend's devotion and jealousy. Dorian rang for his servant, mind set. The portrait must be hidden at all costs, for his own secret was too dangerous and precious to risk exposure again. Dorian was tense as his servant Victor entered, studying the man's blank, obedient expression for any hint of suspicion. Though Victor betrayed nothing, Dorian stayed wary, instructing him calmly to fetch Mrs. Leaf, the housekeeper, and to send 2 workmen from the frame-maker. Alone again, Dorian fretted. Had Victor glanced at the large screen that hid his shameful secret, or was paranoia twisting his senses? Mrs. Leaf soon arrived, bustling in her black silk dress, her hands trembling with age and tradition. When Dorian asked for the key to the old schoolroom, she frowned, protesting, "But it's full of dust, sir. Let me clean it first. It hasn't been opened in 5 years, not since Lord Kelso died." Dorian, his voice sharp with memory and pain, insisted. Reluctantly, she handed him the key, fussed a little more about the household, then finally left, her smile lingering behind her like an old perfume. Dorian moved through the library, settling on a lavish Venetian coverlet, purple and gold, once used by his grandfather. He would use it to cover the painting. The idea of hiding away the corrupted portrait chilled him. He wondered, fleetingly, if Basil could have saved him had he confided. Basil's love was pure, noble, a love that might have shielded him from Lord Henry and the darkness in his own soul. But that hope had passed. Only the future and its inevitable temptations lay ahead. He glanced at the portrait behind the screen, searching for new signs of depravity upon its painted youth. The beauty of gold hair, blue eyes, and soft lips remained, but now twisted with a cruelty that stabbed at Dorian with guilt. Unable to endure it, he tossed the coverlet over the picture. A knock pulled him from his horror. Victor returned. "The persons are here, monsieur." Dorian, cautious, handed Victor a note to Lord Henry and sent him off. Soon, Mr. Hubbard, the florid, red-whiskered frame-maker from South Audley Street, arrived with his rough, awe-struck apprentice. Though Hubbard rarely left his shop, he made exceptions for the enchanting Dorian Gray and offered his eager service. Dorian gestured to the hidden painting. "Can you carry this, with the cover, without scratching it?" As they worked, Dorian insisted on helping despite Hubbard's protests. "Something of a load to carry, sir," the man puffed as they reached the upstairs landing. Dorian led them to the old schoolroom, unlocking his childhood haunt. Its furniture and tapestries unchanged, memories of loneliness and innocence haunted every corner. It would now be the prison of his dreadful secret. He directed them to leave the painting against the wall, and when Hubbard asked for a peek, his voice was sharp. "It wouldn't interest you, Mr. Hubbard." Satisfied when the men finally left, Dorian locked the door, feeling a fleeting surge of safety. Downstairs, evening light filtered in as Dorian discovered tea set out, a note from Lord Henry, and a yellow-covered book beside a marked newspaper. Seeing the empty space where the painting had hung, he fretted over Victor's curiosity. Servants, whispers, secrets, and the risk of blackmail. He read Lord Henry's note, then the marked paragraph detailing Sybil Vane's inquest, a blunt reminder of what had happened. Annoyed, Dorian tore the paper, resenting Lord Henry's tactless intrusion and the persistent shadow of Sybil's death. But what should he fear? He told himself Dorian Gray hadn't killed her. His eyes drifted to the yellow book. He sank into a chair, leafing through it. Soon he was lost in its pages, a mesmerizing, decadent study of a young Frenchman who sought all life's pleasures, a book vivid with decadent beauty and dangerous ideas. The language drugged Dorian, blurring the lines between virtue and sin, saint and sinner. He read until the fading daylight forced him at last to prepare for dinner. Arriving late at his club, he found Lord Henry waiting. "Sorry, Harry," Dorian said with a rueful smile. "That book you sent me was too fascinating." "Oh, I thought you'd like it," Lord Henry quipped. "I didn't say I liked it. I said it fascinated me. There's a difference." Lord Henry's eyes glimmered. "Ah, you've discovered that?" Together they went in to dine, and the evening pressed onward, full of unspoken danger. Dorian Gray fell deeply under the spell of a strange French novel, a book whose decadent hero reminded him uncannily of himself. He bought many beautiful editions, each suited to his shifting moods, and lost himself in its pages for years, seeing his own story reflected in its tale of obsession and decay. But unlike the book's hero, Dorian never feared mirrors, for his youth and beauty shone undiminished, even as rumors about his life swirled through London's elite clubs. People could never believe anything bad of someone so innocent-looking. Men who spoke crudely would fall silent at his entrance, unsettled by the purity he projected. He appeared free of sin, yet behind closed doors, his soul was another matter entirely. From time to time, returning from mysterious absences, Dorian would steal up to the locked room where Basil Hallward's portrait of him hung. he would stand before the canvas and a mirror, faintly delighted, admiring his own youthful face while mocking the twisted, aged figure in the painting, a living record of his corruption. Sometimes, lying awake at night, he pitied the ruin within himself, but this feeling was fleeting. The more he experienced, the more he craved. His hunger for sensation, first stirred by Lord Henry, grew only more insatiable. Still, Dorian kept his social mask impeccable. He held lavish, tasteful dinners, consulting with Lord Henry on every detail. Young men idolized him, copying his style and believing Dorian was living the dream of a truly cultured, worldly gentleman. To them, he was a prince of beauty and taste. To himself, he yearned for something greater than just being a trendsetter. He craved a new philosophy that would justify the intense life he led, a way of living that would worship beauty and the senses, rather than deny them. Contemplating history, Dorian felt loss for the repression and self-denial men had suffered, and he believed, as Lord Henry predicted, that his era would birth a new kind of pleasure-seeking. He didn't want experiences filtered through guilt or asceticism, but to feel each sensation fully and without apology. He thought, why live by the same tedious patterns when one might wake to a new world each day? Obsessively, Dorian dived into new passions. For months, he immersed himself in the study of perfumes, distilling heavy oils and testing the effects of scents on his mind and moods. Next, he was consumed by music, collecting rare instruments from every corner of the globe and hosting wild concerts filled with exotic sounds. At other times, he became fixated on jewels, spending weeks arranging his collection of glittering stones or appearing at parties in extravagant costumes, dripping pearls and gems. Fascinated by art, he gathered textiles and tapestries from far and wide, and his house grew into a treasure trove of rare objects, each acquisition a balm for the dread that sometimes shadowed his soul. He built up a special cache of church vestments, golden and richly embroidered robes, which stirred strange feelings in him, part reverence, part escape. But always it came back to the portrait. Periodically, he'd return to it, sometimes avoiding it for weeks, then suddenly overcome by compulsion, sitting before it and smiling with pride or shuddering with secret loathing. He could never stay away for long. Even travels with Lord Henry or to distant villas lost their charm. He constantly worried about the safety of the painting, fearing that if the world saw it, his secret would be exposed. Rumors escalated over the years. Some old friends began to avoid him. Women who once adored him grew pale at his entrance, and whispers followed him wherever he went. Yet the scandals only heightened his allure to many. As Lord Henry quipped once, even the cardinal virtues can't atone for a bad dinner. Society cared more for Dorian's style and wit than morality. To Dorian, identity was ever shifting. "Do you think a man is just one thing, fixed and simple?" he once teased Lord Henry. "He's 1,000 selves, layered with shadow and regret." He'd roam through his family portraits and wonder what traditions and secret vices he'd inherited. Gazing at painted ancestors, a notorious courtier, a seductive lady, a wicked dandy, he mused, did I inherit all their passions too? Just as much, Dorian found ancestors in literature, feeling as if the monstrous figures of history and novels were shades of himself. Late at night, the fantasies of the novel he loved haunted him, scenes of mad emperors and poisoned lovers swirling in his imagination. "I have lived them all," he whispered in the dark, half in dread, half in pride. For Dorian, good and evil became only flavors of experience. He marveled at how beauty could survive through vice and let himself be carried further down his path, certain that for him art was life, and life itself the ultimate art. It was the night before Dorian's 38th birthday. Wrapped in heavy furs, he walked through the cold, fog-choked streets after dinner at Lord Henry's. As he turned onto his street, he glimpsed a familiar figure hurrying past. Basil Hallward, the painter, a long-time friend who hadn't seen Dorian often in recent years. Dorian felt a pang of unease at the sight, but tried to slip by unnoticed. Basil, however, caught up and put a hand on Dorian's arm, greeting him with a rare mix of relief and urgency. Basil revealed he'd been waiting at Dorian's house for hours, desperate to see him before leaving for a long stay in Paris. They entered Dorian's lavish but eerily comfortable house, with its glowing firelight and silent, attentive servants. As they settled in, Basil grew serious. He refused drinks, tossed off his cap and coat, and said, "I want to speak to you, and you must listen, Dorian." His voice shook with concern. Dorian, lounging on the sofa with casual indifference, shrugged him off. He complained, "I'm so tired of myself tonight. I wish I could be somebody else." But Basil pressed on, warning him that sinister rumors were swirling in London about Dorian's character. Terrible stories, Basil confessed, were destroying Dorian's reputation. Stories of ruined friends, tragic deaths, and disgraced names. With regret and sorrow, Basil recited a painful litany. Young men who had taken their lives, or been ruined by Dorian's association, women now shunned because of him, and friends who avoided him as if he were cursed. Dorian snapped, bitterly defending himself. "You talk about things of which you know nothing," he said, his composure slipping. He insisted that people gossiped out of jealousy, that men of distinction were always targeted for slander, and that he was being unfairly blamed for the failings of others. But Basil pleaded with him, his affection and anxiety plain. "You have a wonderful influence. Let it be for good, not for evil. They say you corrupt everyone you become close to, Dorian. Give me something to believe in, some sign that these things are not true." At the mention that only God could truly see a man's soul, Dorian's fear turned to reckless bravado. He suddenly stood up, pale but wild-eyed, and declared that Basil would see the truth for himself. "You shall see my soul tonight. It's your own handiwork. Why shouldn't you look at it?" Basil recoiled, appalled. "This is blasphemy, Dorian." Dorian only smiled with cold contempt, feeling a perverse pride in sharing his secret with the man who had created his portrait. The portrait that bore all his hidden corruption. Inside, he was both shaken and exhilarated. "Come upstairs, Basil," he commanded quietly. "I'll show you the diary of my life. Everything you want to know is there." Basil, anguished and uncertain, acquiesced. He realized he had missed his Paris train, but it hardly seemed important now. What truly mattered was the answer that Dorian promised to give. The truth, at last, that had haunted their fading friendship. And so, together, they ascended the stairs, each burdened by fear, anticipation, and the unspoken knowledge that something irreversible was about to happen. Dorian led Basil up the old, neglected stairs in silence, the flickering lamp exaggerating every shadow. The door at the top groaned as Dorian unlocked it. He hesitated, voice tense. "You insist on knowing, Basil?" Basil nodded grimly, unaware that his own fate was sealed by this curiosity. Dorian gave a cold smile. "You have had more to do with my life than you think." Inside the unkempt room, only the barest traces of Dorian's life hinted at its secret purpose. Basil's eyes settled on what was clearly a covered painting, its presence unsettling. Dorian's voice was colder than ever when he gestured toward the curtain. "So you think only God sees the soul, Basil? Draw back that curtain, and you'll see mine." Basil faltered. "You are mad, Dorian, or playing a part." With a violent gesture, Dorian tore the curtain down. Basil stared, paralyzed by horror. The portrait was unmistakably Dorian's, but grotesque, ravaged, and hideously altered, twisted by sin. Spots of former beauty remained, but most of it was marred. Basil felt sick, thin sweat at his temples. "What does this mean?" he stammered, candles shaking in his hand. Dorian stood by the window, almost as if enjoying the drama. Years ago, you flattered my looks and finished this portrait. In a mad moment, I wished to stay young forever. It seems the wish came true. Basil, searching for an explanation, insisted, "No, something's wrong with the canvas or the paint. The thing is impossible." Dorian's reply was chilling. "I was wrong. It has destroyed me." As the implications set in, Basil's face broke with regret. There was nothing shameful in it. "You were my ideal. And now, this is the face of a satyr." With sudden bitterness, Dorian whispered, "It is the face of my soul." Basil pleaded with him, his voice barely above a whisper. "Pray, Dorian, lead us not into temptation. Forgive us our sins. Your prayer for youth has been answered. The prayer of your repentance will be answered too." But Dorian, defeated, just shook his head. "It's too late, Basil." "It is never too late," Basil urged, his compassion still shining. "Isn't there a verse, 'Though your sins be as scarlet, yet I will make them as white as snow'?" Dorian's answer was hollow. "Those words mean nothing to me now." Suddenly, something restless and hateful churned inside Dorian. An animal rage. His eyes found a knife left carelessly atop an old chest. He moved behind Basil, clutching the knife as his friend buried his face in his hands. All at once, Dorian struck, stabbing Basil with brutal force. There was only a stifled groan and the ghastly thump of blood on wood and carpet. Dorian stood there, wild-eyed and breathing hard. His friend lay still. The murder finished, Dorian felt eerily calm. He looked out at the quiet city. Policemen, a drunken woman on her way home, wind gripping the bare trees. He shut the window, fixed on one thought. The less he let himself comprehend, the safer he'd be. Dorian covered his tracks. He took the ornate lamp, disposed of Basil's belongings in a hidden press with his own old disguises, and calculated the time. Almost 2 a.m, no one could possibly suspect him. Basil had apparently left hours before to catch the midnight train as he'd intended for Paris. A plan budding in his mind, Dorian pulled on his coat and hat, crept into the hall, and waited until the policeman passed. Then he locked himself out, rung the bell, and waited as his valet, Francis, shuffled to the door looking bleary-eyed. "I forgot my key, Francis. What time is it?" 2:10, sir." "Did anyone call this evening?" "Mr. Hallward, sir. He stayed till 11 and left for his train." Satisfied, Dorian retreated to the library. He paced, piecing together his alibi. Then, with a decisive flick through the city directory, he found the name he needed. Alan Campbell, a man whose scientific precision and former friendship might now be pressed into much darker service. The morning light streamed into Dorian's bedroom while he lay sleeping, one hand curled under his cheek, as serene as a child. It took his servant 2 gentle shakes to rouse him, and when Dorian finally awoke, he smiled faintly. Youth has that power to smile, untouched by cares, even on this day. But as he sipped his chocolate and basked in the pleasant sunlight, last night's horror returned to him, creeping like a ghost upon his memory. His calm shattered. The weight of what he'd done threatened to crush him. He tried to push the thought of Basil's lifeless body upstairs from his mind, spending extra time dressing and chatting with his valet as if it were any other day. He forced himself to enjoy his breakfast, though every letter he read either bored or annoyed him. Dorian's existence was built around the notion of beauty and pleasure, but now those ideals felt curdled and shadowed by fear. He sent a letter summoning Alan Campbell, a man with whom he'd once been almost inseparable. Alan was a brilliant scientist devoted to chemistry, but he'd grown cold and withdrawn after abruptly ending their friendship years ago. Now Dorian needed him for something terrible. As he waited, Dorian tried reading and sketching, but every face he drew turned into Basil's, haunting him until he snatched a book to distract himself. Time dragged, every second stretched with agony. When his servant finally announced Alan's arrival, Dorian felt both relief and dread. Alan entered stern and pale, his black hair making his expression even harsher. "Alan, this is kind of you. I thank you for coming," Dorian said, trying for warmth. Alan's reply was pointed. "I had intended never to enter your house again, Gray, but you said it was a matter of life and death." Alan's contempt was clear. Dorian pleaded with him, explaining, "In a locked room at the top of this house, a dead man is seated at a table. He has been dead 10 hours now. What you have to do is destroy the thing that is upstairs, so not a vestige is left." Alan recoiled. "You are mad, Dorian. I will have nothing to do with this." Dorian tried every argument, pleading, asserting their old friendship, appealing to Alan's clinical detachment, but Alan's refusals grew sharper and more personal. Desperate and cornered, Dorian resorted to blackmail, scribbling a note and sliding it across the table. Whatever was on that note made Alan's face go ghostly white. He buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed. "You leave me no alternative," Dorian whispered. "It is my turn to dictate terms. The thing is quite simple. Face it and do it." His voice was soft but unyielding. Alan, broken by the threat, finally relented. He wrote a note for the laboratory supplies he needed, and Dorian's servant hurried off. A cold, leaden silence stretched between them until Alan turned, face twisted in anger. "You are infamous, absolutely infamous." "Hush, Alan, you have saved my life," Dorian replied somberly, his expression oddly gentle. Hours later, with the chemicals delivered, Dorian arranged for his servant to be gone for the evening. Together, burdened and tense, he and Alan climbed to the locked room. Dorian couldn't bring himself to look at the corpse or the now grotesque portrait, hastily covering it. "I don't think I can go in, Alan," he muttered. Alan's voice was flat. "It is nothing to me. I don't require you." Dorian fled, leaving Alan to the grim task. When Alan finished, he returned pale but composed. "I have done what you asked me to do. Let us never see each other again." Dorian nodded with a quiet, reverent gratitude. Once alone, he climbed back to the upstairs room. The faint chemical stench lingered, but the evidence of his crime had vanished. Dorian Gray arrived at Lady Narborough's house that evening, dressed to perfection and carrying an air of effortless charm. Inside, the drawing room buzzed with idle conversation, but Dorian's nerves throbbed beneath his polished exterior. He marveled at his own composure, wondering how none of these people could suspect the guilt or terror lurking within him. To everyone else, he was simply Dorian Gray, a favorite guest, unaffected and dazzlingly handsome. Lady Narborough was a sharp and witty woman known for her intelligence and unapologetic style, hosting small, lively gatherings when life bored her. She often said, "If I'd met you in my youth, Dorian, I'd have lost my head for sure." Tonight's assembled guests disappointed her, as one had brought her tedious husband along. She whispered to Dorian, eyeing the dull crowd, "You won't be stuck with the bores. Sit by me and keep me entertained." Dorian surveyed the room. Lady Ruxton, perpetually overdressed and scandal-hungry. Ernest Harrowden, an unremarkable clubman. Mrs. Erlyn, chattering brightly. Lady Alice Chapman and her cheerfully ignorant husband. Dorian regretted accepting the invitation until Lord Henry Wotton swept in, as insouciant and magnetic as ever. Dinner proved torturous for Dorian. Food held no appeal, and glasses of champagne only sharpened his thirst. Lady Narborough scolded gently. "You must eat, or you'll insult poor Adolphe." Sensing something amiss, Lord Henry probed. "Dorian, what's going on tonight? You seem off." Lady Narborough gasped in mock outrage. "He's in love and won't say so, for fear I'll be jealous." Dorian replied with a quick smile. "I haven't loved anyone in at least a week. Not since Madame de Ferrol left town." Talk turned to Madame de Ferrol, infamous for her string of husbands and captivating presence. Lord Henry teased. Her capacity for family affection is extraordinary. When her third husband died, her hair turned gold from grief. Dorian chimed in. She claims none of them had hearts I could embalm. As the banter rolled on, Lady Narborough announced she'd find Dorian a wife, to which Lord Henry remarked, "Women marry again because they hated the first husband, men because they adored the first wife." Laughs and clever jabs filled the air, but Dorian felt increasingly detached. After dinner, the men lingered, and Lord Henry slid his chair next to Dorian. Talk drifted to mutual acquaintances and weekend plans, but Harry pressed, "Why did you disappear so early last night, Dorian? Where did you go?" Dorian stiffened. He bit his lip, searching for a plausible answer. "I walked about. I don't remember. I came home late." Harry shrugged, unconcerned. "It doesn't matter. You're not yourself tonight, though. Tell me what's troubling you." But Dorian, restless and irritable, excused himself, pleading fatigue. He left immediately, haunted by the shadow of recent events. Back at his house, Dorian hurried to his library and locked the door. One by one, he tossed Basil Hallward's belongings into the blazing fire, fighting nausea as the materials burned. It took nearly an hour to destroy every trace. Shaken, desperate to cleanse himself, he washed his hands and breathed in scented air. Yet his anxiety lingered. Drawn to a heavy Florentine cabinet, Dorian unlocked a hidden drawer and drew out a small Chinese box filled with mysterious green paste. He stared, torn between temptation and revulsion, but after a moment snapped the box shut, refusing the comfort it promised. Near midnight, Dorian left the house, disguised and tense. He hailed a cab from Bond Street, offering a sovereign and the promise of another for speed. The driver hesitated, muttered about the distance, but relented. Dorian climbed in, and the carriage sped off into the night, carrying him toward the river and destinations even he dreaded to name. A cold, relentless rain beat down on the city as Dorian Gray sank into the back of his cab, watching the ugly nightlife unfold. Every filthy corner and drunken shout seemed part of a darkness he understood too well. He kept repeating Lord Henry's words in his mind. To cure the soul by means of the senses, and the senses by means of the soul. Maybe forgetfulness was enough, if forgiveness could not be found. Tonight, he craved oblivion, anything to stamp out the guilt that gnawed at him after spilling innocent blood. The city grew mean and labyrinthine as the carriage crawled deeper into its underbelly. Dorian barked at the driver to go faster, gripped by an ugly hunger for the haze of opium. His hands shook. He could think of nothing but escape. Finally, they arrived near the docks, where ghostly mists hung on ship masts and the streets glistened from the wet. Dorian hurried along, watching behind him, and reached an unremarkable house wedged between two factories. Only those like him knew the uses of such places. A haven for the desperate, the lost, and the doomed. Inside, among the haggard and broken, Dorian found Adrian Singleton, a man whose young face was already lined by ruin. Adrian was once part of their circle, the kind of gentle soul who, now shamed and cast out, clung to the only comfort left: oblivion. "Where else should I be?" Adrian said, unmoved by Dorian's arrival. "No one speaks to me now." Dorian tried to offer help, but Adrian barely looked up. "As long as one has this stuff, one doesn't want friends." "I think I've had too many friends." Their sadness and resignation pressed on Dorian, making him feel trapped in his own head. Not even hell could surprise him now. Dorian left Adrian behind, insisting he preferred the other, seedier den. "Women who hate one are much more interesting. Besides, the stuff is better," Dorian said indifferently. Adrian just shrugged, much the same. At the bar, Dorian was jeered by a bitter woman with glassy eyes. He tossed her money, barking, "Don't ever talk to me again," The exchange stung, leaving a foul taste that lingered as he walked away. Another of Dorian's old wounds showed itself. Was Adrian Singleton's fate Dorian's fault? He told himself everyone bore their own burdens. Regret had no place here. Turning into an alley, Dorian was attacked. A rough hand clamped around his throat. His would-be killer, a thick-set man with rage in his eyes, pressed a pistol to his head. "You wrecked the life of Sybil Vane. She was my sister," the man said, face twisted with hate. This was James Vane, Sybil's brother, obsessed with vengeance after her suicide so many years ago. Dorian, desperate, played his last card. 18 years ago, you say. Look at me. Could I be the man? Under the dim lamp, James saw Dorian's face, unchanged by time. Still a youth, untouched, pure. Distrust and confusion flooded James. He faltered, "My God, and I would have murdered you." Dorian took a breath, fashioning himself as the wronged. Let this be a warning not to take vengeance into your own hands. James let him go, overwhelmed by doubt. But as Dorian disappeared into the night, the broken woman from the bar crept over to James. She sneered, "Little more than a boy, nigh on 18 years since Prince Charming made me what I am." Before God, James pressed, desperate. "Strike me dumb if it ain't so. He's the worst one here. He hasn't changed since then. I have, though," she rasped, her bitterness plain. With a curse, James dashed off, realizing his quarry was slipping through the cracks of reality. Alone in the fog, neither hunter nor hunted felt any peace, only the shadow of the past, growing ever darker. A week after their last encounter, Dorian Gray hosted an elegant tea at his country house, Selby Royal. The guests lounged in the lush conservatory, where orchids and silver glowed in the lamplight. The Duchess of Monmouth, charming, clever, and a little mischievous, held court over the tea service, her husband inattentively chatting about exotic beetles with Lady Narborough on a nearby sofa. Lord Henry lounged across from Dorian and the Duchess, his eyes ever glinting with irony. "What are you two plotting?" Lord Henry asked, sauntering over. He teased them about his latest theory, renaming the world in more poetic terms, and sparred playfully with the Duchess about the value of names. "Names are everything. The man who calls a spade should be forced to use one. That's all he's fit for." The Duchess arched an eyebrow, refusing any new name. Dorian chimed in, dubbing Lord Henry Prince Paradox. The Duchess agreed. "I recognize him instantly." Lord Henry laughed off the title, protesting, "From a label there is no escape. I refuse." Their banter wove between flirtation and philosophy, skirting topics like beauty, goodness, and society's hypocrisy. They debated England itself, Lord Henry critic, the Duchess defender, until artfully the conversation shifted toward romance. "We women," the Duchess declared, "love with our ears, as you men love with your eyes, if you love at all." Dorian smiled, weary. "It seems to me that we never do anything else." She pressed, "Ah, then you never really love Mr. Gray." Lord Henry fielded this one, claiming, "Romance lives by repetition. The secret of life is to reproduce experience as often as possible." "But even when one's been hurt by love?" the Duchess asked softly. "Especially then," replied Lord Henry, his voice light yet edged with truth. The Duchess studied Dorian, searching his eyes. "And you, Mr. Gray, does this philosophy make you happy?" Dorian's answer, soft, bitter, evasive. "I've never searched for happiness. Only pleasure." She sighed. "And found it?" "Often. Too often." Wanting to break the mood, Dorian offered to fetch orchids. As he left, Lord Henry and the Duchess continued flirting, weaving metaphors of Greeks, Trojans, wings, and courage. When she teased that Lady Narborough also adored Dorian, the Duchess felt a twinge of competition, but Lord Henry only grinned. Suddenly, A groan broke the pleasant tension. Everyone froze as Dorian, pale and fragile, collapsed in the conservatory. Bewildered, his friends carried him inside. When he awoke, frightened and shaken, he whispered, "Am I safe here, Harry?" Lord Henry reassured him it was just fatigue, but Dorian insisted on rejoining dinner, fearing solitude more than company. Later, as laughter and music filled the dining room, only Dorian felt true dread. He couldn't shake the image of a pale face. James Vane's, spying through the conservatory glass, haunting him like a spectre from his guilty past. Dorian shut himself away for days, gripped by fear and indifference, haunted by the memory of a vengeful sailor's eyes watching him through misted glass. Even the tap of leaves against his window reminded him of every regret. He tried to convince himself it was only his imagination playing tricks. After all, no one had reported a stranger near the house. No footprints in the flower beds. Nothing out of the ordinary. Surely, he reasoned, Sybil Vane's brother was gone for good and had never learned Dorian's true identity. His unchanging youth remained the perfect disguise. Still, he wondered how long he could go on if the shadows of his crimes followed him everywhere, mocking him in dark corners, interrupting his pleasures, and chilling his sleep with fear. The memory of killing his friend tormented him. Even time itself seemed to bleed horror back into his mind. After isolating himself for 2 days, Dorian finally left the house. The crisp winter air and serene blue sky lifted his spirits, and he convinced himself his terror was only a temporary lapse. He joined the Duchess for a stroll in the garden, then headed to the shooting party. Sir Geoffrey Clouston, the Duchess's blunt, sporting brother, was there, reloading his gun. Dorian greeted him casually. "Had good sport, Geoffrey?" "Not great, Dorian. Maybe after lunch on new ground." Suddenly, a hare burst from the grass. Dorian was captivated by its grace and called out, "Don't shoot it, Geoffrey." "Let it live." Geoffrey only laughed, aimed, and fired. Instantly, 2 agonizing cries rang out, the pain of the hare, but worse, the pain of a man. Geoffrey's shot had struck a beater. Chaos erupted. Geoffrey, frustrated, snapped, "Why on earth don't you keep your men back?" After a tense scramble, the beaters dragged the body into the open. Dorian, shaken, turned away, gripped by the dreadful feeling that disaster trailed him wherever he went. Lord Henry joined him quietly. "We should stop the shooting for today," he said. Dorian, voice heavy, replied, "I wish it was stopped forever, Harry. The whole thing is hideous and cruel. Is the man dead?" Henry nodded, almost flippant. It was the man's own fault. Besides, it's only awkward for Geoffrey. No point talking about it further. But Dorian couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. "It's a bad omen, Harry. I feel something horrible's about to happen. To me, maybe." Lord Henry smiled. "The only horrible thing is boredom. Destiny doesn't send warnings. You, Dorian, have everything. There's nothing for you to fear." But Dorian looked haunted. "There's no one I wouldn't trade places with," he said bitterly. "Not even that dead peasant. It's the approach of death that terrifies me, not death itself." He pointed nervously to a shadow behind the trees. Harry reassured him, "It's just the gardener. You're too nervous, my dear fellow. You should see my doctor." Dorian received a letter from the Duchess and answered curtly that he would join her. Lord Henry, as always, drifted into banter with the Duchess, Gladys, who was beautiful, clever, and renowned for her charm. As they debated flirtation and scandal, she commented, "Harry, Mr. Gray is ill again. He's going to faint." Dorian forced a smile and excused himself, claiming he'd overexerted himself. Alone, Dorian lay trembling, the horror of the day and Harry's mocking words echoing inside him. That evening, he resolved to leave Selby Royal for London. Death seemed to haunt the estate. While preparing to leave, Dorian was visited by Thornton, the head keeper. Dorian tried to appear detached, asking, "Was the poor fellow married? Does he have anyone dependent on him?" Thornton hesitated. "We don't know who he is, sir. He seems like a sailor." Suddenly, Dorian's nerves snapped taut. "A sailor?" he repeated, heart pounding. Did the man have anything that could identify him? Thornton nodded. "Just some money, a six-shooter, no name, a tattooed rough sort." A ghastly hope flared in Dorian. He had to see the body. Racing to the home farm stables, he forced himself to confront the truth. On a heap of sacking, the dead man's face was covered. Dorian choked out his instructions to a servant. "Take that thing off the face. I wish to see it." When he looked, elation surged. James Vane, Sybil's vengeful brother, lay dead. Relief overwhelmed Dorian. As he rode back, tears filled his eyes. He knew for now that he was safe. Lord Henry watched Dorian Gray with a mischievous smile as they finished dinner, his elegant hands perfumed by rose water. He chided Dorian gently, telling him not to ruin his perfection by striving to become good. Dorian shook his head, troubled and earnest. He confessed to Harry that his life had been full of terrible deeds, but he'd made a small start at redemption. He had spared a young woman who reminded him of the doomed Sybil Vane, someone he had truly loved, if only for a fleeting spring. Her name was Heighten, a village girl radiant as flowers, and Dorian had almost run away with her. But at the last moment he let her go, choosing to leave her innocent and unspoiled. Lord Henry scoffed, rolling berries in sugar. "So you enjoyed the thrill of mercy and left her heartbroken. That's the start of your reform, then?" Dorian insisted that Hetty would be fine, that there was no shame for her, only a sweet, safe memory. Henry laughed, asking if she'd ever be able to marry a dull ploughman now, or if Dorian's love had raised her just high enough for misery. The younger man, frustrated, pleaded for the subject to drop. "Don't tell me my first real sacrifice is a kind of sin, Harry. I want to be better." Seeking distraction, Dorian asked what was happening in the city. Henry told him the town was still 9 days deep in gossip about Basil Hallwood, the missing artist who had been Dorian's closest friend. Scotland Yard chased rumors, the press spun wild theories, but Basil remained gone. Dorian, controlling his nerves, asked what his friend thought had really happened. Henry shrugged, unmoved. "If he's dead, I don't want to think about it. Death is the only real terror." They took coffee in the music room. Lord Henry requested a Chopin nocturne. Dorian, hands trembling over the piano keys, suddenly asked if Harry had considered the possibility of murder. Henry dismissed the idea. Basil hadn't the temperament for dangerous places, nor enemies enough. He joked that crime was just the art of the poor, a vulgarity Dorian couldn't muster. An uneasy silence fell until Lord Henry, stroking an exotic parrot, probed Dorian about the lost portrait Basil had painted of him, a masterpiece now vanished into the past. Dorian claimed he'd lost it, and that he'd never liked it. Gazing over at Harry, he recited a bitter line. "Like the painting of a sorrow, a face without a heart." Lord Henry mused philosophically, asking if it profits a man to gain the world and lose his soul. Dorian flinched, sensing accusation, but Harry acted oblivious. He launched into a monologue about art, youth, and how the only voices that inspired him now were those of the young. "You're extraordinary, Dorian. You haven't changed a bit." Dorian quietly disagreed. Life, for him, was no longer so exquisite. Something in him had shifted irrevocably. He admitted, "You don't know everything about me. If you did, even you might turn away." Lord Henry, light-hearted as ever, urged him to play more music, promised a charming new acquaintance, and tried to coax him out to the club. Dorian demurred, feeling tired and weighed down. In parting, Dorian asked Harry never to lend out that infamous yellow book, the one that had so affected him in his youth. "It does harm, Harry." Lord Henry only smiled at the idea of books being poisonous. We are what we are. Art doesn't influence action, it only makes us see ourselves. They agreed to ride together the next day, and as Dorian left, his pause at the doorway betrayed the secret heaviness he carried. He sighed and disappeared into the night, leaving Lord Henry amid his witty words and lingering doubts. The warm night wrapped around Dorian as he walked home, his coat slung over his arm and a cigarette smouldering at his lips. He overheard his name spoken by young men in evening dress. Once, that might have delighted him, but now he only craved obscurity. The anonymity he'd found in that quiet village and with that innocent girl. Hetty Merton seemed to promise him the innocence he had lost. He'd lied to her, even about being poor or wicked. She simply laughed and told him, "Wicked people are always very old and very ugly." Her laughter was like a songbird, her joy natural and bright, reminding Dorian of all he no longer was. At home, Dorian dismissed his waiting servant. Alone in the quiet library, he pondered Lord Henry's cynical theories. Could he never change? He ached for the purity of his lost youth and knew he had stained himself and others, most tragically the gentle souls who had crossed his path. Was all redemption lost to him now? He thought bitterly of the wish that had brought him eternal youth, wishing he'd faced consequences instead of hiding every sin. He caught his reflection in the ornate mirror Lord Henry had given him. He remembered those passionate, mad words once written to him. "The world is changed because you are made of ivory and gold. The curves of your lips rewrite history." He heard them echo, despised the beauty that had become his curse, and in a wild moment shattered the mirror underfoot. "My beauty was a mask, and my youth a mockery," he muttered, voice thick with regret. He tried to leave the past buried. He could not undo it. The deaths that shadowed him, James Vane, Alan Campbell, Basil Hallward, felt somehow distant, each one a tragedy he could separate himself from. The real torment was the persistent corruption of his own soul. Basil's portrait, the damning evidence of his downfall, haunted him. "It's not the death of Basil that troubles me," he whispered. "It's the living death of my own soul." Craving a fresh start, Dorian clung to the hope that sparing Hetty was the beginning of his redemption. Maybe, if he lived purely, the portrait upstairs would reflect a restored innocence. He decided to check. With hope fluttering inside him, he climbed the stairs, convinced his better self would be visible in the canvas. Unlocking the secret room, he drew aside the old velvet curtain. His heart plummeted in horror. The portrait was worse than ever, its eyes cunning, its twisted mouth smirking with hypocrisy. The red stains spilled over the hands, more vivid now, as if new blood had just been shed. Was his recent kindness just for show? A failed performance? Lord Henry's words mocked him. Is even a good deed only curiosity or vanity in disguise? His mind raced. Must he confess everything, give himself up for Basil's murder? Why should I confess when the world would deem me mad? He thought savagely. There was only one piece of evidence left. The portrait. If he destroyed it, maybe he could silence his guilty conscience for good and finally be free. He snatched the knife he'd used on Basil, a cold, gleaming blade untouched by stains after so many cleanings. If the knife had ended the painter, it could now destroy the painting too. Destroying it, he believed, would erase his sordid past and the monstrous secret gnawing at his soul. Without hesitation, Dorian plunged the knife into the heart of the painting. A terrible scream rang through the house. The servants, trembling, gathered in the hall as two men passing outside stared up at the lighted window. Eventually, a policeman was summoned, and the group gained entry via the balcony. Inside, they discovered, hanging untouched on the wall, a flawless portrait of Dorian Gray, unblemished, eternally youthful. On the floor lay a dead man, knife in chest, horribly aged, withered and grotesque, so transformed that only his rings revealed his identity. Dorian Gray, who had bargained away his conscience for eternal youth, was finally revealed in death for who he truly was. Thank you for joining us on this illustrated journey through the picture of Dorian Gray. We hope the combination of narration and artwork deepened your connection to Oscar Wilde's haunting tale of vanity and consequence. More timeless masterpieces are on the way, so be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated on our next release. Until then, keep the love of classics alive and let us know which story you wish to hear next.